True aliveness comes in a very different way. There's a difference between activation, stimulation, and aliveness. Stress narrows our perception because it's a survival technique. The stress zeroes in on what we need to do to get the job done, and awareness opens us up. It opens up our perceptive field. Stress contracts the body. Aliveness opens it. Welcome back to the Art of Awakening podcast, where the art of living awake becomes a daily practice. I'm your host, Dr. Sue Morter, and today we're diving into something almost every human experiences, yet very few truly understand. It's called stress. All right. So it's, everybody experiences it, right? But we're going to just talk about this from a couple of angles that may be helpful for you in new ways. So it's not just the feeling of stress that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the chemistry of stress as well. As sometimes we can become chemically dependent, even addicted to certain chemistries that run through our body. So most importantly would be this addiction that happens in an unknowing way. If you've ever been feeling a little off and then all of a sudden you find yourself in an argument, and then after the argument, while you're upset emotionally, something feels better inside of you. And we oftentimes think, well, I feel better because I got to say what I needed to say. Even if it didn't get heard, at least I said it. But it might also be that there is a chemistry that happens when we, shoot the cortisol through our system that actually is generating a fix of sorts. And so if those arguments happen often in your life, chances are there is some of this going on with you. So in my books, I share how the human body is designed to live in elevated states of awareness and creativity and flow. By design, we are built to be in these higher frequency energies, but we have defaulted into living in cycles of stress chemistry that keep us surviving instead of tapping into those higher vibrational frequencies and thriving. And we think that it's being alive. We think that that's what is causing us to feel alive and here and present, when actually it's something entirely different that's happening. So what if the tension that you feel, the urgency that you operate from, the pressure that you think you need in order to get something done is actually a biochemical dependency? Today, we explore what's happening in your body and how to consciously shift from survival mode to creative mode to make a difference in your life and in these chemical, tendencies of desire or even addiction at an unconscious level. So let's begin with just a little bit of science. When you perceive a threat, physical danger, or even a challenging email comes across your computer, your body releases stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, in short bursts. They are brilliant. They're there. They prepare you to fight, flee, move, prove, make a point, what have you. Now, this is your survival system kicking in. The problem is not the response itself. The problem is when survival becomes your baseline, okay? Because what happens is the moment that those chemistries hit your bloodstream, the moment that they are infused into the brain and the body, there is an uplifted, heightened awareness, and it makes us feel lucid and alive. But over time, that way of getting to a sense of aliveness is going to cost much more than it can ever contribute. So when you're activating stress chemistry all day long, your body adapts. Your cells develop receptor sites for the chemicals that you repeatedly produce. It's a supply and demand type of thing. So if you produce stress hormones daily, your cells begin to expect stress chemicals, all right? And so if they're not there, there's a feeling of something's missing, something's not quite right yet, something's not familiar, and that throws us further into another fight or flight dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. This is how we become addicted, not emotionally first, but biochemically. So you may feel uncomfortable in calm situations. Think about it. In the silence, do you go crazy? You might feel restless in stillness. Okay, here's a little sign. Are you the person that's constantly jiggling their foot? Are you the person who's constantly tapping the pencil or the pen? Although we, are more into, computer keyboards nowadays. Are you tapping the tabletop? Are you drumming even though there's no song playing? Those are the signs that this is kind of happening with you. So are you uneasy when nothing is wrong? I have to tell you, that was me. There was a time in which I was so hyper lucidly, aware of the discomfort that was happening in family situations. My mother was regularly uncomfortable, even though she was always trying to be a good person and do the right thing and say the right thing. And she was always there for everyone. She was the one that people would point out as the most conscientious and congenial person that they had ever met. But underneath that was a layer a mile thick of discomfort and not being simply satisfied. Now, she was one that would see the beauty of life, and so you could never say that about her. She was an artist. She could capture the most beautiful things in her paintings. She was aware. She loved music. She was living a life of a deep appreciation, and there was also a layer underneath that was not comfortable. And so I just want you to check in, because you can do the doing, you can be the beer, but are you feeling well? Are you feeling aligned? Are you feeling comfortable? Are you at peace deep inside? Because if your system has memorized intensity, which was the case with me, that the moment that intensity wasn't there, my system would automatically look for what was wrong. And I can't tell you how many times, how many hundreds of thousands of times in my life I have asked the question, what's wrong? What's wrong? You're not okay. Because I developed this hypervigilance when I was a kid under the circumstances that I was just sharing with you. Oftentimes children will develop this kind of thing if there was an abusive parent or lots of arguments or alcoholism or, these kinds of things. And it wasn't to that degree in my family. So it was a little insidious. It's like, you couldn't really put your finger on it. But there was just this undertone of non-acceptance or something's not quite right or perfectionism that was, in the mix. And so, we're very attuned to our parents in one way or another. And for me, I was very attuned to both of my parents, but I was always asking my mom, what's wrong? You're not talking, you're not saying. It's in there, I can see it, I can feel it. Because I could see energies as a kid, but even if you couldn't see energies, you feel it. You know when something's not quite breathing freely, right? So inside, my system, was running full steam ahead, which unfortunately led to a lot of success in my early life. I could push myself. I was totally uncomfortable, but I could push myself to do things, and I was good at them. And so I figured at some subconscious level that pushing myself to do these things was, what it takes to get things done. And so I started getting headaches. I went through school, I graduated and set up a clinic and was treating patients and helping others with all these kinds of things. And I started getting headaches. And so that was because of the intensity. You just were not built to do that. I wasn't connected. I wasn't connected to source and connected deep inside. And I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. Nobody was having that conversation when I was in my 20s, opening a clinic and doing my thing. In my 20s, I was 23 years old when I opened my clinic. So, there was this whole chemistry happening and I didn't know it. And energy that is not metabolized, that isn't actually utilized, if it's just this stress chemistry that isn't actually utilized, it becomes stored. We store it. And we store it in terms of unfelt emotion, unprocessed shock, unresolved experience. And so this was my life. It is our life until it's not. It creates density in the tissues and in the field. And that density generates the need for something to harmonize it, to balance it. And so when stress chemistry fires, it feels familiar because that's what jolts us into a feeling of aliveness when all this density has generated itself in the tissues and in the field, in our energy field around our body. And so we often confuse what is familiar with what is actually alive. So the chemistry of stress feels familiar because we've been living that way. We've started to perceive ourselves as, oh, I feel so present and so juiced, but we're actually filled with adrenaline in that moment. So it's a false imitation of being alive. True aliveness comes in a very different way. There's a difference between activation, stimulation, and aliveness. Stress narrows our perception because it's a survival technique. The stress zeroes in on what we need to do to get the job done, and awareness opens us up. It opens up our perceptive field. Stress contracts the body. Aliveness opens it. Stress moves blood away from the prefrontal cortex and into survival centers. You lose access to creativity, and to compassion, and to higher reasoning. You access your fastest self instead of your highest self. And so we think in a world that's performance-oriented that the fastest self and the fastest answer and the quick fix is what's going to get me what I want. And, I spent years in a clinic working with people in their 40s and their 50s, in their 60s and their 70s that wish that they had known what I was sharing with them in my 20s and my 30s, when they were in their 20s and 30s, only because I was exposed to that, when I was younger. So I knew the language. I knew what to look for. I hadn't implemented it for myself yet, but I knew how to help other people. And so when I began to recognize that, I'm constantly asking what's wrong. I'm not asking what's right. And so if I'm always asking what's wrong, people were always bringing what was wrong. And when I started asking other questions, I started surrounding myself with another reality. I started moving into high vibration and possibility. And simply by changing my come from. Now, by changing my come from, I started to change my environment, but I still had to go deep inside. We still have to constantly be going deep inside to find our highest self. The highest version of you is located so deep inside of yourself, you've likely never been there. You've never been fully into the depths of your being. Now, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it because we tend to think of our highest self as something that's high, up and out and beyond. And if we will allow a true representation of what this world is, it's all inside out, literally. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but the world is a reflection. And so what we think we need to go out there to get is actually more deeply found within here, because we project onto a movie screen that which we are. And as we learn that what's reflecting back to me on my movie screen is reflecting back to me based upon what I have allowed myself to be and what I have not allowed myself to be. When we learn that reality, we recognize that, when things aren't going great in my movie, it's not about me going out into the movie and changing the way people are and who they are and how they think and behave. It's about me coming more deeply inside of myself and changing how the energy is allowed to move through me, changing the chemistry that my system is running on, changing the chemistry that my system has become familiar with, changing the chemistry that my system now prefers. And then what happens is I'm open and different chemistry is running through my system and I'm more available to possibility. And so I begin to respond instead of react. I begin to create instead of just cope. And I begin to operate from a place of inspiration instead of urgency. And what happens is I begin to have a different chemical makeup running through my system, running through my bloodstream, running in my organs and glands, that there is something different that we're about. There's something different that we're creating on a physical, chemical level. It isn't just mental. It's literally physical and energetic and felt in your body when this shift begins to change. So here's what happens. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, prepares you to survive, but chronic cortisol keeps the system charged and tense. Adrenaline and epinephrine, your rapid response chemistry, they begin to sharpen your senses and you feel more lucid, and it increases your heart rate and it floods the muscles with energy, and chronic spikes make the body hyperactive in that same way that in an actual emergency would be exactly what you need. But if you're chronically doing this and doing this and doing this, it generates this revved up sense of self. Norepinephrine, the transmitter of alertness, keeps your mind focused on danger and racing energy. So glucose is an energy surge that stress triggers inside of your liver. Your liver releases sugar for quick energy in your body. When this is happening and you then go use it, it's awesome. And when you don't, it gets suppressed into cellular storage. It can feel like your blood rushes and jitters, or sudden hunger, or all sorts of stress peaks in your body. But truly what we have to realize is that if we're jacking our systems up like that, we need to go use it. So this is one of the reasons that I'm asking people to be more physical than you are used to, particularly under stressful times. Don't go to the exercise or to the gym to work out your stress. Go to those exercises, body awake yoga or conscious calisthenics that I'm teaching people. Go into that activity to celebrate your creatorship, to celebrate the fact that you're in a body and you can lift these weights and you can move this body and you can feel the joy of that. Because when you do that, the chemistry that gets generated is in harmony and it allows your body to metabolize it. Whereas the stress that we generate under mental and emotional experiences or circumstances that we do not then go and utilize generates a version of truly a modulated version of chemistry that gets stuck in our system. And it then produces a chronic stress that shifts your body from healing to survival mode, and it allows for inflammation and resistance over long periods of time that are lowered. So here's what I mean. Your resistance gets lowered, your immunity is suppressed, you become inflamed in the body, and you have neuro-emotional chemical changes, all because you're not using the chemistries that you're generating. So if you're a stress cat and you tend to worry in worst case scenario ways of thinking, you have to get your body in motion to utilize that excess energy. The excess chemistry has to be utilized. And as you do, you begin to ease the tension that will eventually show up in your chest, in your throat, in a felt manner. So in these situations, neuroemotional chemistry changes and energy stacks up in the chest and the stomach and the throat. And as a byproduct of this is a felt experience of chemistry before the mind even knows what you're stressed about. So we end up running on this over and over and over. Dopamine and short-term reward chemistry, the addiction to stress, surges of adrenaline and cortisol followed by a relief create a neurochemical feeling of reward. We become addicted to the reward associated with having these chemicals of stress just flourishing through our body. This can make us unconsciously seek stress because it feels energizing in some way. It's a felt experience that we have. And so some cues that you're doing this to yourself is, tightness in the chest, Cortisol and adrenaline are associated with this. A knot in your stomach, you're stacking up the energy in the ways that I'm describing. A lump in your throat, neuro-emotional charge is associated here. A racing mind, norepinephrine alertness is over generating an out of balance state inside of your system. Recognition is key. When you recognize these chemistries, you can shift them. So being inside of these felt senses in your body, you begin to respond instead of react. So if you're reacting instead of responding, chances are your chemistry is out of balance. If you're stressed, it's really time for you to have embodied awareness. It's a signal for you to be recognizing there's something else going on here. If you are charged, you can move into an alignment that allows for the chemistry to change. And it's essential that we do this. It's essential that we begin living in this way. It's a foundation for transmuting stress into energy that you can use. When you practice central channel breathing, you signal safety in the nervous system. And when you're signaling safety in the nervous system, you're automatically regulating that system as it's designed to be functioning. And so what do we need to do to have this balance? We need to recognize that there is something different happening inside of our systems than what might be knee-jerk reacting in an addictive pattern. That there is something actually beautiful that's trying to rise up from deep inside. There is a love inside of us that all of this addiction never allows us to feel into. It never allows it to become real in our lives. And so once we begin to recognize that and to breathe with it and to get underneath all this chemistry and to recognize that, wow, I'm constantly running around with tightness in my chest or a lump in my throat or an upset stomach, then I'm actually running on stress chemistry. And the moment that I recognize it and soften, I begin to reduce the cortisol. And when that cortisol lowers, different chemistries can emerge. Oxytocin, serotonin, we know these things. Balanced dopamine is a sign that we're actually releasing this addiction. These are connection chemicals. They're well-being chemicals. They're fulfillment chemicals. And just like stress, you can become conditioned to peace. You can actually seek it out in terms of allowing these chemistries to run through your body on a regular basis. Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, these chemistries are the chemistries of happiness, of joy, of peace. This is where embodiment becomes essential. Body Awake Yoga helps you move these chemistries through your system. It automatically allows you to stretch and open the tissues. By anchoring in your anchor points, you begin to ground energy into the body and into the lower body where our stress responses start. And so while doing this, while getting on the mat and understanding how this energy runs through the body and how we can amplify it and magnify it and transmute it into these chemistries of joy and of peace and of presence, what happens is we begin to feel that we're in charge of our bodies again, of our system again. And here's the beautiful part about it. Energy that is circulating in your body will allow you to feel the groundedness that is the truth of who you are. And when we're not in the body, we get pulled up into the head. When we get pulled up into the head through stress and overthinking and overtrying and overperforming, this energy pulls up and out of the body. We live from the neck up. We analyze then and we strategize and we're constantly trying to control things. But safety lives below the diaphragm. When awareness drops into the lower body, the system starts to recalibrate. We move from control to trust, from forcing to allowing, from tension into flow. And when we do, we start to resonate with a new kind of achievement. High achievers oftentimes rely on stress chemistry to perform. And those days have to move behind us. We have to learn that there's another way to achieve. one that is authentic and integrated and infused with the wisdom that we carry deep in our core. And so we have to change our priorities and change our benchmark and change our route to get there. We do so by beginning in our own lives to drop inside and anchor in our deep core. And this whole idea of the deadline rush and the pressure spike and the last minute push, it feels energizing in the moment. And then oftentimes we crash. Chemically, it's expansive, but it's expensive by contracting us in the short run. So the expansiveness that we achieve is only short term until we learn how to drop inside and really run on the chemistry that we're designed for. Chronic cortisol suppresses our immunity, it disrupts our sleep, it increases inflammation, and accelerates aging. It isn't philosophy, it's physiology. We're not designed for constant emergency. We're designed for rhythmic creation, activation, recovery. When recovery disappears, addiction begins. We reach for something else that will keep us, juiced up into that same state. When coherence returns, creativity awakens. And instead of living in constant reaction, something profound happens. You respond instead of react. You create instead of cope. You choose presence instead of pressure. You access your highest self instead of your fastest self. This is a shift, not eliminating stress entirely, but restoring rhythm by honoring what it really takes to be in a true state, in an authentic way of living, one that creates and sustains and lets go of what you don't need so that you're in this rhythm and flow more easily, and you can reinvent and be in a creative state again when it's actually needed. So ask yourself, am I creating from inspiration or reacting from stress chemistry? Think about it. Watch how it shows up in your life. Watch the patterns. Watch the unhealthiness. And know that you can change it any moment. Awareness interrupts addiction. And over time, your baseline shifts. You crave clarity instead of chaos. You live from flow instead of force. And this is called recalibration, the human system. And you're capable of it. You're built for it. In fact, every moment that you take action on noticing and shifting this, you're making a contribution to the whole bandwidth of humanity. Human consciousness is shown that transformation can happen by you. And literally, someone on the other side of the planet responds to the fact that you've made a shift, you've dropped in, and you've allowed your own true integration to matter, not through willpower, but through embodied awareness. When this happens, your whole life changes. Your whole household changes. And when that unfolds, your neighbors change, and your coworkers are benefiting by your presence there. And when that occurs, we start to see and feel the influence that we're having in the world in the most beautiful of ways. So, this may have been a lesson in chemistry, but I want you to understand it's really a lesson in how do we recognize the addictions in our life? How do we recognize when we are actually running on knee-jerk reactions instead of truly allowing what is meant to be to unfold in our lives, the way that it is meant to unfold? So thank you for joining me today on the Art of Awakening podcast, where we're blending science and spirituality to create a life that we truly love living and that we can live long enough to enjoy it because we're enjoying it every step along the way. Thanks for being a part of that with me. So remember to subscribe and share this episode. And until next time, I'm Dr. Sue Morter. Blessings, blessings, and peace to you all.